Europe was full of religious wars for many years, right? Whether it is Protestant versus Catholic, whether sects within each other, whether it's England or France or Germany, okay? There were a lot of places that suffered quite a bit from all these sectarian wars. And the Founding Fathers wanted to establish a country which will not be prey to these kinds of problems. And their solution was that maybe if we do not endorse a religion, or what they really meant is a sect, right? Because they were all Christians. They are not talking about establishing another religion. They were trying to avoid all the wars among the Christian sects. So they said, therefore, the state is not going to endorse one. And despite the fact that they said that, some Christian sects, for example, had a pretty hard time in this country in the early days. And many people do not realize that the Baptists had a pretty bad time for a while. And some of them were jailed, and some of them were tortured, and that was not very long ago. And they were responsible pushing the First Amendment among the Founding Fathers to protect their status. And there were other people who did that as well. So the whole idea of separation of church and state that the Founding Fathers came up with was not an idea of being agnostic or of being an atheist. Many of them were deists, if not Christian outright. And so they believed in God. But they didn't want to force upon the American people a sect or a set of beliefs. Now, having understood that, we go to the Islamic model of 1500 years ago. And in that model, what we found is a Quranic revelation which says, there shall be no coercion in religion. And if you go to the Quran, there's a website. Let's pick a website for the Quran. Where is Sarah? Sarah doesn't come today?
She's on her way. Like a website that translates?
Hmm?
I mean the website that translates the Quran?
Well, there are many, and I'd like Sarah to suggest to us a good website for that.
I used to use the EBA.
Well, there are several. Yeah. There is a website with at least 3 translations. I want the Yusuf Ali translation to be one of them. And there could be two more, and I will work with her on that so that you can double check and search for these verses that are not in front of me right now. In fact, when I did research in Virginia on the papers of Jefferson in Monticello, I found his cyclopedia, and in his cyclopedia, in one of the footnotes, he quotes, not from the Quran, but he states the idea, there is no coercion in religion. Where did Jefferson come up with this idea? It's, you know, almost verbatim what the Quran as translated in those times said. Was Jefferson aware of Islam?
Yes.
What do you think? Yes? Who says yes? How do you know?
He had a Quran.
How do you know?
Because Keith Ellison swore when he wanted to.
And that's your referral?
Well, no, I'd heard about it before, but...
Such as? You know, I was the first one to discover that Jefferson had the Quran and wrote it in an article which is on our Karamah website. So to refer to Keith.
I think actually it's also mentioned in a few pop culture
now.
Movies. Yeah, now it's becoming more.
Now, but in the early 90s, someplace in an article of mine, when I was researching the Jefferson papers, I found out that he owned, actually it was a student of mine who was given credit in the article, Nancy Jensen, who did a lot of research on Jefferson at Monticello and at William and Mary, because he went to school there, in Williamsburg actually, sorry. And a lot of interesting questions worthy of greater research. If any of you are interested in doing research on Jefferson and Islam, we are thinking about trying to find a project that we could fund on that. You can talk to me about it. But we found out that he had a Quran when he was in Williamsburg. And then we found out, as you all know, that his library burned down. And then we find out that he donated his reconstructed library to the Library of Congress, and guess what? It has a Quran in it. So the idea is that either the first Quran did not get burnt, or it got burnt and he even replaced it, or had 2 copies of the Quran. Okay? The copy he has is 2 volumes, which is surprising since the Quran is only 1 volume. But the first volume is really a history of the culture. So he was familiar with the culture in which the Quran was revealed. He was familiar with the Quran. And he and Madison did a lot in their travels of collecting books and articles and information about various cultures, Islamic and otherwise, and their modes of governance and other aspects, in order to come up with a conclusion about how the American Constitution should be designed so that it will not fall in disrepair like many of those other countries and empires fell into disrepair. The idea was that if we do it right, this country could go on, indefinitely. Very optimistic idea. But so we go back and we suspect that he had some knowledge of this idea of there is no coercion in religion. And if he did, it would have come from the Quran 1,500 years ago. By the way, this idea is the idea that is responsible for the First Amendment in the American Constitution, the freedom of conscience. We call the religious freedom in the US Constitution the first freedom. The first freedom in the American Constitution is the freedom of conscience, freedom of belief. There is no coercion in religion. Not just no establishment, right? There's no coercion. So we go back to the Islamic concept. And we ask ourselves, where in his practice did the Prophet ﷺ model this statement in the Quran, this principle that there is no coercion in religion? And the clear answer is in the Charter of Medina, which we don't have here because everything is packed in my house as I move. And I would like, and the reason I wanted to share with you my translation is because the translation that Lubaba found is Orientalist in certain ways. And so I did not want to share it with you. It means that, look, I don't want to spend the time criticizing the translation, but I will give you one example of how the translation is pretty remiss and patriarchal, not just let's go, could you go to Article 30, please?
13?
30. This is actually a good example, and then the other example. The Society of Medina was made up mostly of Jews and idol worshippers. And the idol worshippers, and I guess some of the Jews became Muslims, okay? So it became a city of Muslims and Jews. It is an interfaith city. The Prophet came in, what is he going to do about it? Is he going to establish Islam in the city and force the others to follow it? Are they going to be penalized for not being Muslims? Well, I could show you the whole compact, but every tribe at that time had a religion of its own, whether it's Muslim or Jewish. And for the Muslim tribes, before this, at the beginning, he says the same thing, basically. Here's one example of a Jewish tribe. The Jews of Banu Auf, okay? So Banu Auf was a Jewish tribe, and he says, shall be considered a community along with the believers. In Arabic, it's the word ummah. Have you heard the word ummah? I mean, if you say today in the Muslim world that the Jews and the Muslims are going to be one ummah somewhere, some people would want to penalize you for saying that. It's pretty bad, right? I mean, we're fighting each other, How could you be one ummah? Ummah is only for Muslims. It cannot be Muslims and somebody else. But this is what it says here. Because really the state is about having joint purposes, joint goals, joint aspirations. And when you do all that, you are one ummah.